So I want to talk about something that came up today in the Discord for the Slag podcast. And it was kind of a topic that was inspired by a discussion that came from one of our Patreon supporters, Zero. We were talking about the Transformers TCG and how he would really like it if one day the Omnibots would find some kind of way into getting modern toys in the future, preferably through obviously the War for Cybertron and what's going on with Siege or whatever will be the future for generations for Transformers. Now, I brought up something that I've talked about many times in the podcast, which is sometimes the best way to get a spoiler for what's going to be happening in the future is to look no more than the trademarks that are going on with Hasbro. Obviously, Takara has their own way that they do things, and you're not going to get spoilers on their end. Japanese exclusive stuff, like let's say a big powered 3-pack with Diatlas and Roadfire and Sonic Bomber, like that kind of stuff you won't get a spoiler for. But specific stuff that'll also appear on the American side of things, it's almost a given that if there's a trademark that's coming up or a figure of a character hasn't existed for the past 3 years or so, and it's a current trademark, it kind of gives you a pretty good idea of what's going to be happening. And I mean, the best example of that, even from new trademarks, was I'll never forget, like a year before Transformers Prime, Hasbro trademarked Arachnid. And everyone was going like, oh, wow, that old trademark from Beast Wars, they re-trademarked it again after I think it was like 15 years or 10 years at that point. And everyone's like, where's that going to go? And lo and behold, we had the character Arachnid the following year. So it's, and then there's all the other examples that I've talked about on the podcast. Something is up for 3 years and boom, here's another refreshed character. So in partakes to the Omnibots, and for people who don't know, the Omnibots were one of the first Mailway Generation 1 Transformers. They were 3 different Autobot characters that all kind of sported a kind of a third alt mode, but not really a third alt mode. Kind of the precursor to a lot of ways with the Dark of the Moon Stealth Force kind of stuff, I guess is the best way to put it. But either way, the characters consisted of Overdrive, Camshaft, and Downshift. Now, I just want to jump through these quickly and talk about how literally the story of this whole segment is how a trademark literally prevented a toy from getting released. And I got this story directly from a certain somebody. I don't know if I should mention his name, but anyone who knows who I roll with that's directly from Hasbro knows who I'm probably talking about. But they gave me this story because I asked him literally after we had this conversation on the Discord. I was like, hey, what was the story with that? And he gave me like literally the whole like story. And I pretty much assumed most of it from what I already knew with how it works with Hasbro and having to deal with trademarks in the past, working with FunPub, BotCon, and Hasbro. So essentially, like, let's break it down. So you have characters like Camshaft, right? One of the Omnibots. And original 1985 trademark. And then trademark dies because, Hasbro, especially back then, didn't really care about refreshing trademarks. And then years later, we had the movie character Camshaft in 2008, which was just a repaint of the movie Swindle toy from 2007. So that trademark was refreshed. And then in 2010, it died again. And the trademark has not been refreshed since, and it has since expired since 2010. And there's been no action from that trademark since for the past 9 years. And it still hasn't been, refreshed since then, which is kind of a shame. You then have characters like Overdrive. Overdrive is a good example of a character having to be renamed because they couldn't get a trademark. Overdrive was one of the Omnibots back again in 1985. His trademark expired in 1987. And then just fell into obscurity. And then years and years later, when alternators was a thing, they were going to take the Binaltech, the Japanese version of alternators, Binaltech number 12 Overdrive, and they were going to bring them over here and call them Overdrive. They couldn't get the Overdrive name. Apparently there was trademark issues. They couldn't secure it. There never was specifics why it couldn't be secured because I tried to look into it myself with the patent office and the trademark office, and it looks like it's just there. Maybe it was just because it was too generic because there seemed to be no one that had that trademark around that time in that period, so it just couldn't be secured. So they went with Windcharger, And that's why that character is literally one character as Binaltech, but that same mold, minus, I guess you could call it, like didn't have the hood accessory, but that same mold, more or less, that same color scheme, more or less, on the other side of the ocean is a different character completely from Generation 1. Only because they couldn't get a trademark. That's so funny how they do that. And then you jump to the most interesting of them all in Downshift, and how pretty much the main reason of this story was of how a toy literally was made, ready to go, and then because of a lack of trademark, among other things, led to this toy just not even being released, even though it got to the final packaging stage and everything. So the character of Downshift, again, was an Omnibot, 1985. Trademark expired in 87. But then when Armada rolled around in 2001, they started trademarking a whole bunch of names for all of these mini-cons. Every 3-pack of mini-cons, that's 3 trademarks right there. So they dug up a whole bunch of old names, made a whole bunch of new names, but the Race Car Patrol from Armada, or the Race Mini-Con team, whatever you want to call it, the ones that made the Skyboom Shield, one of them was named Downshift, specifically the Le Mans kind of looking car, which was a really cool mold, by the way. Then, of course, a couple years pass after that trademark. The trademark was issued in 2001, but it expired and was going to expire in 2004. So they refreshed it again. And then we had the Energon character, Downshift, which is the one that looked a lot like Wheeljack and was called Wheeljack in Japan in Superlink. Once again, 2004 going into 2009, refreshed that trademark, but they didn't. They didn't do anything with that trademark, and they let it expire. I assume, to make use of it before it expired. I know that there was a lot of repackage reissues of that Energon Downshift character throughout the years, but ultimately in the end, the trademark expired, and they didn't think to re-trademark it, to just refresh it again. And then when they were going into the tail end of what I would call the Transformers 2010 line, or the Reveal the Shield line, we were shown at, I believe it was San Diego no, it wasn't San Diego, it was BotCon. I remember now. We were shown at BotCon 2010 a whole bunch of stuff, a bunch of repaints that were going to be at the tail end of Reveal the Shield. And we got a whole bunch of characters that were shown off, and all these different repaints of pre-existing mold. And one of them was of the old Scout class hubcap, which was this, it was this old school vehicle. I believe it was a Willy, I want to say. I don't remember what was the alt mode. I remember it was something that was close to a 1930s Willy, one of those old mafioso kind of cars. And so they took that hubcap mold and they repainted it, and they called it Downshift. And it had a very, very Big Daddy, Micromaster Big Daddy kind of look to it. And it was going to be in a wave also with a repaint of some of the other Scout class characters. I believe they were called Rumble and Body Block. And that was going to be a case assortment for the tail end of the 2010 line. That whole line got discontinued because pretty much it was coming way too close to Dark of the Moon, which was going to be making its launch in 2011. But another reason for it was the Rumble trademark wasn't existing. The Body Block trademark didn't exist. And then the real nail in the coffin was, hey, they literally made the packaging. They put the they put the packaging together. They did the bio, the whole thing, and they have Downshift right there on the packaging, but they didn't have the trademark. So ultimately, in the end, this repaint and all of these guys just didn't even happen. And once again, Downshift is also one of those characters going into 2019. Trademark has not been refreshed at all. So pretty much a long answer is all 3 Omnibots right now, none of them are trademarked. Now, that's something that, who knows, maybe in the future, Hasbro will file for a trademark of all 3 of these guys. Maybe they might, again, I don't know the situation. Downshift is the problem with these 3 names is that they're very common terms. Like Overdrive, they obviously probably couldn't get just because of over all three of these are car terms. Downshift is from downshifting with a manual transmission. Camshaft is something that is inside of a motor, specifically at the ollie dongle. I mean, the ironic thing is that camshaft, the original 1985 camshaft, is an RX-7, specifically the FB3S, which was like one of the first RX-7s. But RX-7s are rotary engines and they don't have camshafts. So, a camshaft doesn't actually have a camshaft. And overdrive, I mean, anyone who drove a 90s automatic transmission, there's an overdrive button on there. Overdrive also applies to a whole bunch of other engineering terms. But I mean, that's just, I guess, from a car standpoint, we could assume, the old overdrive term there. So there are three trademarks also that I imagine maybe from a toy standpoint would also be pretty difficult to trademark because of their generic origin. But I mean, if somehow Hasbro manages to pull this off and they get back camshaft, because camshaft was around until about 2010, so maybe it isn't too impossible. And overdrive isn't too impossible also, because again, around 2010, that trademark was still around before it died. Overdrive might be the only problem, but who knows? They might just, they might pull a reflector and just call it refractor. And so you might have overdrive and they might call it, I don't know, over skies, overground, overrun, one of the many other alternatives they could do. And hopefully they'll get the other two. I mean, personally, they would be, I would like them a lot because those were three really cool cars. And I'm a big car guy, kind of a car guy because I'm a mechanic. But they're three really cool cars that I would really like to see at some point find their way into the future and get brand new toys. I mean, hey, we got the other Mailway exclusives in those Power Dashers. So I mean, if we could get Power Dashers in 2019, why not the Omnibots?